doing this in this Zoom format, except for that, I guess we've been doing this for a year, so it's not all that weird anymore, unfortunately. Anyway, the good thing about it is I can meet with you, you can meet with me. I have no idea where anybody is. I guess you're all over the place, which is cool. Just in case you don't know who I am or why you're here, my name is Marc Okrand, and my connection to all this language stuff, linguistics stuff is I'm a linguist by training. I have a doctorate in linguistics from Berkeley from about, 300 or 400 years ago. Studied primarily, my academic studies were primarily, although not exclusively, in American Indian languages, mostly North American, north of Mexico, mostly West Coast, mostly California, mostly around the San Francisco Bay Area. At the time I was doing those studies, there were 0 speakers of the languages I was looking at the most. So all of my work was on those languages anyway, was done from old documents written down by missionaries maybe, or linguists or anthropologists who preceded me, and mainly one guy named John Peabody Harrington, who someone should make a movie about, who gathered up linguistic and cultural information too of among the native Californians in the first half of the last century. He went running around up and down the state, gathering all kinds of notes, and he was so intent on doing this that he didn't get around to publishing much, although that's not true. He published a lot, but compared to what he gathered, he didn't publish much. So after he died, all of his notes kind of got accumulated, mostly at the Smithsonian, because that's who he worked for. A subset of them ended up in Berkeley for some reason or other. To this day, I don't know why they didn't all go to the Smithsonian. But anyway, and it was that batch in Berkeley that I looked at first, although subsequently I also did some work at the Smithsonian and looked at some more. So that's what I was doing, linguistically, but on the way, or while that was going on, I kind of got sidetracked and got hired for what I thought would be a day or two at the most worth of work to make up alien dialogue for a couple of Vulcans in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, if you know that movie. There's a short little scene in the movie where Mr. Spock, who everybody knows, I'm assuming everybody knows who Mr. Spock is and who Vulcans are and things like that. Mr. Spock has a little conversation with a new character, a female Vulcan named Savik, or some people say Savik. I don't know why no one knows how to pronounce her name, but anyway. And what the little conversation is well, they go on to the Enterprise, and they have a little conversation with Captain Kirk, or Admiral Kirk, I guess is what he is then. And he goes away, and Savik turns to Spock and says, "He's not what I expected," or "He's never what I expected." And Spock says, what do you expect? And she says, "Well, he's so human." And Spock says, "Well, nobody's perfect." All right. And that's the little scene. And when they filmed the scene, the actors were speaking in English because the script said to do that. And in post-production, when they were putting everything together, they decided for a number of reasons, and I can tell you what the reasons are if you want to know. Anyway, they decided that they should be speaking not English, but they should speak in their own language together, which is Vulcan. But they didn't want to film it all over again. So they got the idea to hire somebody, and the person they had in mind was a linguist from UCLA. I have no idea who'd come over and look at the scene, which is, if it's 10 seconds long, I'd be surprised. Listen to what they said, right to what they said, and look at their lips, and then basically make up gobbledygook that the actors would dub in that would match the lip movements but sound different. And for a number of reasons, which I'm not quite aware of, whatever the deal was with this person at UCLA wasn't working out. By total luck and chance, this sounds like a weird Hollywood story, but it's true. I happened to be having lunch at Paramount Studios. Why was I having lunch at Paramount Studios? Because I was out in LA to do some work on something else. because my main job all these years had to do with closed captioning, not with linguistics in the narrowest sense. And I was out there for that and had some spare time and got together with some friends. And one of my friends happened to work at Paramount, so we got together in the Paramount commissary. And this whole notion of what they were going to do with the Vulcans came up. And I told them I thought that was a really good idea, and hiring a linguist made a lot of sense because linguists understand how you make sounds and what sounds look like other sounds and what sounds don't, and what sounds you cannot see at all because you make them down here and all that kind of stuff. I said, good for you, hiring this guy, that makes a lot of sense. And they said, yeah, we thought it was a good idea too, but it's turned into a headache. And this is 35 years ago or something. I don't remember what the headache was all about, except it was a boring headache. And what I mean by that is it had to do with playing telephone. This is pre-email and stuff, playing telephone tag and our schedules not match. It wasn't artistic differences or something interesting. She said, I don't know what we're going to do because we have to have this taken care of right away. And I said, what do you mean right away? She said, it's got to be done by the end of this week, which is exactly how long I was in LA for this other project. The other project was the Oscars, by the way. So I said, well, I can do that. You just described what needed to be done. And as you were describing it, I was thinking how I would go about doing it. And my friend said, yeah, he can do that. He's got the same kind of degrees as those people at UCLA do. At that point, the associate producer happened to walk by. They turned to him and said, hey, we just solved the Vulcan problem. He said, what are you talking about? They told him about the conversation. He said to me, come see me after lunch. All right. A lot of years go by and here I am talking to you. Okay. That's what happened in between. So I did that little tiny bit of Vulcan gobbledygook and thought that was fun. That was an interesting project for a linguist to do. Working on a movie was fun in general. Working on Star Trek was a particular treat, to be fair, because I got to teach the actors how to do it, right? Got to teach Saavik, who was Kirstie Alley, if you know who she is. This is like her first job in Hollywood or something. And Mr. Spock, of course, was Leonard Nimoy, so I got to teach him. And then I finished teaching him, left, realizing I just taught Mr. Spock how to speak Vulcan, thought life is good, and thought that would be the end of it. But about a year and a half later, I got a call from Harv Bennett, who was the writer-producer of, he was executive producer, I guess, of Star Trek 2, but he was also the same thing for Star Trek 3, the next film. He said, we're making another movie. The villains are going to be the Klingons. He says, I think the Klingons ought to speak in their own language, and it should sound like a real language. You did Vulcan, you want to do Klingon? So I said, yeah. So I ended up creating Klingon, which was a different project altogether, because that wasn't lip sync gobbledygook. That was going to be a real language, real grammar and vocabulary and consistent sound system, and all those linguistics things. There was a teeny bit of Klingon before me. Okay, in the first Star Trek movie, Star Trek the Motion Picture, there's the very beginning of the movie is the Klingons. And you see the 3 Klingon ships flying by, and one by one they get zapped by something or other, then they're not in the movie anymore. But before that happens, you see the Klingon captain of one of the ships barking out commands in Klingon. And he just says these quick syllables, and there's subtitles. That's the beginning of the language, maybe half a dozen, maybe 8 words. Something like that. So I took that as the start and built and built and built on that. We can talk about it if you want later, what the building was all about. Just for sake of historic accuracy, that language, the language that was used in the original motion picture, was made up primarily by 2 people. One of them was one of the producers on the film named John Poville. And the other one was one of the actors on the film, James Doohan, played Scotty. They made up the dialogue, and the actor who spoke it was a guy named Mark Leonard, whose connection to Star Trek is he usually played Spock's father in a number of iterations, but in this particular thing, he was a Klingon, and he spoke the lines. But they wanted it to sound cool, but they didn't pay any attention to grammar or vocabulary or anything like that. And I don't think they even paid attention to what the sound system might be. They just wanted it to sound strange and alien and whatever that means. So all the grammar and everything else came later on with Star Trek 3 when I did that. And then they continued to use that language in all of the iterations of Star Trek, all the rest of the TV shows, all the movies, not all the movies, most of the movies, and so on. And when I did it for the third movie, once again, I thought this was cool. And this was even better than Vulcan because this was really, a lot more creative, a lot more complex. And when I was working on it, meaning when I was out, as I was there with the actors, during the filming, if you see someone speaking Klingon in Star Trek 3, almost all the time, I'm just outside the frame. Okay, not always, but most of the time, because we would practice, shoot, okay, like that, because the actors had to learn the lines. And when I was out there, people would come up to me from time to time and say, "Oh, you're the language guy." Yeah, and they would say something in Klingon. And I would say, "What should I say?" And they'd say hello, how are you? And I'd say, a Klingon would never say hello, how are you? Anyway, I got tired of that joke, so I made up a better answer than that, so I could say something in Klingon to them. But I got to thinking that if these guys were interested in the language and how it worked and all that kind of stuff, there were some people who I was vaguely aware of, but hadn't had a lot of contact with out there in the world, called Star Trek fans. And I thought they might be interested. So I proposed to the powers that be that I write a book explaining how the language works. And they said, another whole complicated side story, but they said yes. And I did that. And when I did it, it included all of the grammar that I'd made up for I should back up a little bit. When I made up the lines for the film, I didn't make up anything other than what was needed for the lines of the film. Okay. So in the film, in the script, it would say so-and-so says in Klingon, and then it would give the English translation. So I made up all those lines. And I also made up Klingon versions of all the lines that were supposed to be spoken by a Klingon in English. Not when they were talking to Captain Kirk, but when they were talking to another Klingon, because the Klingons mostly talked English to each other, because it was a Hollywood movie and we don't like subtitles. So I made up all the Klingon versions for all of those, so that while we were filming, if someone said, "Hey, why is this guy talking English? He should be talking Klingon," I could say, "Here, say this," as opposed to, "Oh, gee, let me go think about that." Okay. They used 0 of those lines, but I'd made them up and they helped flesh out the grammar, flesh out the vocabulary and all that. So when I was writing the dictionary, I could make use of all that, expanded more, because as I say, I only made up enough lines when I was working on the film that were needed for the film. So it was really a skeleton of a language, not maybe skeleton is wrong because it missed a lot of bones. It wasn't all there. It was mostly there and mostly hung together, but there was chunks missing, and that was okay for given what the project was. And what I've likened it to from time to time is a set, like a movie set. If you've ever seen a movie set, if you've ever been on one or seen a movie about a movie or whatever, if let's say the plot takes place in somebody's house, okay, and in the thing, the house has there's a front door and there's a couple of windows. If in the story no one ever has to go through that door, the door doesn't open. They put a door there, and it looks like a real door. It has a real doorknob, but it doesn't work. Okay? And Klingon was initially the same way. I made just enough that you need. Okay? So I invented a pronominal system, but I didn't fill out all the pronouns because not all of them had to be used. So there was kind of a slot for one if something were to come up later on, but I didn't do that yet. When I did the book, I started filling in all those blanks and expanded a lot. And I thought what would happen with the book I hoped what would happen with the book is people would buy it, because when you write a book, you hope people will do that. But what I thought what would happen is people would buy it, they'd take it home, and they'd say, "Oh, look, here's the Klingon word for shoe." And then they'd put it down on the coffee table, and that would be that. And every once in a while, someone would thumb through it a little bit, see a couple other words, or see something funny about verbs. I don't know. It turns out I was right about the fact that people would buy it. I was wrong about the fact that people would thumb through it and put it on their coffee table, and that was it. Because I soon learned that people read it and reread it and studied it intently and compiled a list of the typos and all these things. And a language speaking community started to develop, which I didn't know was happening, because the people who were interested in it were able to find each other. I should add, in terms of chronology, that the book initially came out in 1984, 85. And then there was a second edition that came out in 1992, and that included stuff from later movies and from later TV shows. And that's the one that really caught on, is the second one. And at the same time that book came out, at that same time is when the internet was getting going. And that's not irrelevant, because that's how people were able to find each other. Okay, and that's how this whole community could get going, because it used to be the case that somebody on his or her own would be interested in this, and maybe the kid across the street would too, but probably not. And everyone would kind of do this by themselves. But once the internet was there, people were able to find each other all over the country, all over the world. And this language-speaking community developed, which was an utter surprise to me when that happened. But that's been chugging along fine. There's still Klingon in the movies sometimes. There's still Klingon on the TV shows sometimes. And lots of Klingon speakers. And there's a resurgence right now for some reason. There's a lot of renewed interest in Klingon. So the Klingon-speaking community, not meaning the Hollywood actors or anything like that, have online conversations, online meetings. They write stuff. They translate stuff. You can buy books in Klingon. The latest translation of a work of literature in Klingon that's available is The Wizard of Oz. Has come out in the Klingon version. But there's also Shakespeare, because hey, and it's going on and on. There's annual meetings, used to be in person, now they're Zoom. All these things, and it's carrying on. And at one time I thought I knew everybody who spoke Klingon. I cannot claim that at all anymore. There's expert speakers of Klingons popping up all over the place. I don't know how they did that, but anyway, they did. So that's who I am. That's what I've done. On paper and for income tax purposes, I'm retired, but I'm still involved a little bit with Klingon and the other Star Trek languages, doing stuff like this. I've worked on the newest Star Trek. Well, it's not the newest anymore. I guess second or third newest Star Trek show, Discovery. I don't know if anyone's seen Discovery, but season 1 of Discovery is very Klingon heavy as far as the plot goes. And therefore, there's lots and lots and lots of Klingon dialogue, a lot more Klingon dialogue in that than there has been in anything else. And I didn't do it. Okay, it's my language, it's my words, it's my grammar, but somebody else did the translation. A couple of people did it, mainly a woman from Vancouver named Robin Stewart, who is an excellent, that's not enough praise, speaker of Klingon. And they did a bang-up job doing that. And fun footnote fact, Star Trek Discovery in the US, season 1 I'm talking about only, it was available on something called CBS All Access, which is one of those streaming services. In Canada, it was available on something or other, I don't know what. But everywhere else in the world, it was available on Netflix. Not in the US or Canada, but everywhere else. And Netflix, not for purposes of Star Trek, but for purposes of international Netflix, gives you a choice when you watch a movie or TV show. You can watch subtitles in different languages. So it happens to be a French language show, you can watch it with English subtitles. If it's a Spanish language show, you can watch it with German subtitles, and so on. For Star Trek Discovery, season 1, you could watch the entire show with Klingon subtitles. Okay, when they're talking English, the subtitles will come up there in Klingon. And that was done by a guy in Germany named Ivan Litar. So it was an international effort to do all these things. As I said, I'm still connected to Star, so I've done some non-Klingon stuff, other languages for Star Trek Discovery. So I'm still got my feet in there a little bit. All right, that's it. That's my introduction. That's who I am, and that's what I've done and why I've done it. So what do we do now? How do we want to work this?
Great. So we have a couple questions piled up. So I guess we'll start with Mickey.
Yeah, I wanted to know sort of a two-part thing here. How much experience had you had with conlanging as sort of or building languages before the Klingon and Vulcan projects, and how did you go about it? Did you build any kind of like sort of proto-Klingon language from scratch? Did you or did you try to like fuse some irregularities in there or something, or was the goal to make it as like easy to communicate as possible?
Yeah. You're a conlanger, right?
I wouldn't call myself a conlanger, but I know aspects of the community.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, Vulcan wasn't really conlang. Vulcan was gobbledygook lip sync. As was, by the way, the Vulcan in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which I didn't work on. But in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, there's a scene that takes place on the Vulcan planet where Spock is being inducted or whatever into some kind of a, I want to say cult, that's probably not fair, some kind of something called Kolinar. And the entire ceremony is being conducted in Klingon. And that was the same deal. That scene was shot in English, and then they dubbed in gobbledygook to match the lips. So that the Vulcan ceremony on the planet Vulcan, where nobody was there except for Vulcans, would be in Vulcan, which makes a lot of sense, which they didn't think of until post-production. But anyway, that's not conlanging. That takes some language or linguistic expertise to know that a ma and a ba are going to look the same on the lips, and stuff like that. But there's no grammar or vocabulary or whatever involved at that stage of the game. Klingon was different. Okay, Klingon was, again, there was a tiny bit of frankly, gibberish, half a dozen words or whatever. Maybe half a dozen syllables is better than words to start with. So there were some sounds and some syllable types to begin with, but no vocabulary, grammar, or anything like that. So that is conlanging. That was creating a language. You had to think about it. However, it was not the normal or best way to go about creating a language. To answer part of your question, did I have any experience doing that before? No. Okay. Did I know anyone who had done anything like that before? Yes, but I didn't pay much attention to what they had done. I knew that they did it. So I just plunged right in, and I said, okay, it's going to be a real language. What does that mean? Now, the marching orders, if that's the right word for Klingon, were a couple of things. They didn't just say to me, go make up Klingon, end of discussion. There was some stuff that they wanted. One of them was, and all the stuff they wanted wasn't hard and not unusual or weird. One of them was, it should be an alien language, they said. So I said, okay, now what does that mean? It's an alien language. That means it shouldn't resemble any language on Earth because it's not an Earth language. Okay? But the people who are going to speak the language, as far as I know, were all Earth actors. So they had to be able to pronounce this stuff. They weren't going to do anything electronic. They weren't going to play things backwards, nothing like that. So everything had to be pronounceable. So I'm thinking, okay, so how am I going to make an alien language that's speakable by non-aliens and make it sound strange? So what I figured was, well, the way languages work, you're all language people, so you know all this. But anyway, the way languages work, if anyone says to you, all languages do X, maybe. But languages tend to do things, okay? So if we're talking about the sound systems of languages, certain sounds tend to be found together in the same language, and certain sounds tend to not be found together in the same language for a number of different reasons. So I violated those rules and put sounds together that are perfectly good human language sounds, but they shouldn't be together in the same language, okay? The whole scheme is odd for the consonants. The vowels are not so weird, but the vowel scheme is a little odd. And most of the sounds, given I was dealing with Hollywood actors, I don't mean to sound like I'm putting them down, but dealing with human actors, whose native language or whose language of fluency anyway was English. Most of the sounds were perfectly good North American English sounds. Probably 2/3 are ordinary English sounds. And only 1/3 of them or so are sounds from other languages that English speakers would have a tough time with at first blush. So that was a way to make it alien. And then I did the same kind of thing thinking about the grammar, even though I knew that people watching the film would, Star Trek 3, I'm talking, this is before I thought about writing a book, right? They wouldn't have enough opportunity to hear the lines over and over and over again, or the same words in enough different contexts to figure it out. Okay. But still, I was going to pretend they did. And so make sure that everything was consistent and worked properly. And not be like a human language. Okay. But it had to work. They had to really say stuff. So I said, okay, so what can we do? So I thought about, well, let's think about what order the words come in. And if you take sort of the three basic elements, to simplify things grossly, you take the three basic elements of a sentence, the subject, the object, and the verb. Okay. You have to have 3 words if you're going to not have pronouns and all this stuff. You're just going to have 3 words. You can't say them all at the same time. So they have to come in some order or other. Mathematically, there's 6 possibilities. Subject, object, verb, verb, subject, object, subject, verb, whatever. There's, twist them all around. There's 6 possibilities. And if you look at all the languages of the world, you'll find languages that do each of the 6 as their sort of neutral word order. I mean, the English neutral word order is subject, verb, object. Dogs bite people. Okay. Which is not to say they can never be in some other order. Okay. You can say ice cream I like. Right, so it can come in a different order, but the normal, everyday, unmarked order is subject, verb, object. So looking at the normal, everyday, unmarked order in all the languages, you'll find representatives of all 6. However, some of them are a whole lot more common than others. So the one that English has is really, really common. Verb final languages are really, really common. The uncommon ones are the ones where the object comes first. There's very, very few of those. And some of them, whether that's the correct interpretation of the order is even controversial a little bit. I picked that for Klingon. The one for the Klingon word order is backwards from English, object, then verb, then subject. And I picked it not because it's backwards from English, but because it's the least common in the world as a neutral order. And therefore, in a way, the least human, which is not to insult the speakers whose languages really do that. Okay. So things like that. So that was ways to make it be, to tweak the grammar, sort of is what you were talking about, kind of. So I did that sort of thing. And then just built and built and built and built as I'm going along. And one of the guiding principles for me, although nobody told me to do this, was, see, if it's going to be an alien language, okay, it's going to not sound like anything, but I wanted to go out of my way to make sure it didn't sound like anything, any Earth language. Not just because the Klingons are from outer space, but because what we knew at the time culturally about Klingons wasn't very much. What we knew was what we saw in the original Star Trek TV series from the 1960s, and from what I knew in the script for Star Trek 3, which is Klingons are horrible. They're mean and awful and warlike and terrible, and you wouldn't want to get near one, not much less be one. So I wanted to make sure that the language I made up didn't sound like a real, even remotely like a real Earth language, because if it ended up sounding like, Portuguese by accident, then I got all of Brazil upset with me. You don't want to do that. So I went out of my way to not make it sound like anything. And people said to me, well, does Klingon, is it based on something? Does it, did you base it on any Earth languages and stuff? And the answer is no. For the reasons I just talked about, no. However, having said that, you can't help but be influenced by what you know. And what I know, besides English and a couple of European languages, is American Indian languages and languages from China, Southeast Asia, that part of the world. Those are the things I studied the most. And things from all those things did creep in. And as soon as I realized something from one of those things was creeping in, I would stop doing it, whatever it was, and switch gears entirely. which is not, I wouldn't necessarily throw it out, but I wouldn't follow through. So it wouldn't resemble anything quite enough for anyone to say, hey, that's just like, okay. So that was the approach to that. Now, after I did Klingon and got involved in this, and heard about there's all kinds of people out there in the world making up languages, constructing languages, all these conlangers all over the place. And I've gotten to know some of them personally and some of them, by internet and stuff like that. And the languages that a lot of these people have done and the sound systems that they use and the grammatical features of them and stuff like that are just incredible. The kind of stuff that people have come up with. Far more, I think, interesting than Klingon. Far more well thought out. You asked about the proto-languages. The best way is, assuming you've got the time and the interest of when someone to make up a conlang, is to make up its history as well. So that if the language is going to change over time, you can see where it came from and where it's going and how it changed and what the influences were and all that kind of thing. That's the right way to go. Klingon, as I say, was constructed like a door on a set that doesn't open. Whole different procedure. And the resulting shape of the language is based very much on that kind of weird, not recommended history.
And I'm sure, sorry to interject, but I'm sure the magnitude of the conlang community today owes not in small part to the work that you did on Klingon.
Well, thank you. I think it might owe a little bit of its, sort of getting out in the world and people know what you're talking about to Klingon, but it certainly doesn't owe noun phrases to Klingon. All right.
So our next question comes from Alec.
Sure. So how did you become interested in languages? Did you speak different languages at home during your childhood?
I didn't speak different languages at home during my childhood. I grew up in Los Angeles, in a primarily monolingual household. There was Yiddish speaking grandparents, and keep secret from the kids speaking Yiddish speaking parents, that kind of thing. But no real bilingualism or anything else. However, in Los Angeles it's more so now, but then it was pretty much a bilingual place, English and Spanish. There was lots of Spanish all over the place. So kind of an awareness was there all of the time. But I didn't really get into it except for studying in school and stuff like that until I went to college. And freshman first week, I guess, in college. The university I went to for undergraduate is the University of California in Santa Cruz. And when I went there, the campus was brand new. It had been there 1 year before I got there. And the school, it's not so much this way anymore, but when it was new, it was designed on the Oxford system, which meant that there was a number of different, what they called colleges. And you went to one college, and your dorm was there, and your classes were there. You could take a class in another college without any problem. But you were very much a member of that community. And at the time I went, there was a choice of two. Ultimately there was supposed to be 20. I don't know how many there are now, 10 maybe. There was a choice of two, so I picked the newer one because it was the newer one, and for no reason besides that. I said, if I'm going to a new school, I'm going to a new school. And they had a course for freshmen that was called, all the freshmen had to take, called Language, Society, and Culture. Or Language, Culture, and Society. I forget which way it went. And I don't know this for a fact, but I have a theory that the faculty teaching that course threw it together the weekend before the students showed up, because of a very weirdly organized course that turned out to be brilliant. And because what it was an introduction to the faculty and an introduction to the disciplines. Every week it was taught by a different faculty member. Language was a common thread through the whole thing, but 1 week it was a philosopher, and 1 week it was a psychologist, and 1 week it was a historian, 1 week it was a literature professor, and so on. So you got all these different views, all these different perspectives on language, and you also got to meet the faculty who, because it was this small little college thing, you would see eating lunch. And, oh, that's who that is. Yeah, I just heard them personally give a talk about something. And there was one linguist on the faculty at the time, and he was kind of the bread for this sandwich of a course. So he was the one who talked at the beginning, first week, and the one who talked the last week. And the way he talked about language is a way I'd never heard of before. He talked about how you analyze languages and language history and all these things, as opposed to here's how you conjugate a verb if you want to say a Spanish sentence. And, very, very different thing. And this was absolutely intriguing. So I said, well, this is cool. So I took Linguistics 1, or whatever, it was not called that. Finished that up, took Linguistics 2. Then summer came. When I came back from summer, in my brand new college, they've already revamped the entire linguistics program. And Linguistics 3 did not exist anymore, so I couldn't take it because they combined Linguistics 2 and Linguistics 3. So what are we going to do? So they set up what they call independent study. It was just me and the linguistics professor, which is a sophomore, is very unusual to have that kind of one-on-one instruction. And we talked about the things that I would have learned in Linguistics 3 had it existed. And he gave me some real projects to work on, not just textbook stuff, but real language data to work on. And that's where I got hooked. It was doing the real stuff in that kind of a context. Ironically enough, when he was giving the lectures, he was talking about something one day and talking about certain aspects of language. He mentioned something that I'd never heard of before. So I went up to ask him what this was all about. So my first interaction with this guy was this question. And the question was, I wanted him to tell me a little bit more information about what he had been talking about this guy called Tolkien, who made up some languages. What? Right? So I thought it was kind of interesting that my first encounter with the linguist had to do with the conlang. Of course, who knew at that time what's going to happen? But
all right, so our next question comes from Connor.
Hi, Dr. Mark. So I like to call myself a conlanger, although I'm not I'm not a professional by any means. But I'm just wondering what I feel like a struggle that a lot of conlangers have is just like making naturalistic sounding languages, at least if that's their point. Obviously, like stuff like Esperanto and other auxiliary languages don't need to sound naturalistic. But from your work on Klingon and other Star Trek languages, what have you done to make a language sound naturalistic, whatever that means to you?
Okay, for Klingon and other Star Trek languages, I hope I didn't do very much, because if naturalistic means human. Because I wanted to sound weird and strange and so on. Although Vulcan, which I did more work on, sounds a lot more naturalistic or whatever than the other stuff. But that's because I had to base it in part on what had come before. Anyway, the other language that I probably spent the most time on and developed the most is a language called Atlantean. There was a Walt Disney cartoon. I'm sorry, I keep saying that. There was a Walt Disney animated feature in 2000 called Atlantis, The Lost Empire, which is a wonderful movie. You should all see it if you haven't. The hero is a linguist. How many movies are that, right? And the story is that an expedition is put together to go find the lost continent of Atlantis. And they hire this linguist who works at the Smithsonian. This takes place around World War I time. And all the technology is of that vintage. Anyway, they managed to get to Atlantis, and they hired this linguist because there's a book. They found a book with writing in the Atlantean language explaining the history of Atlantis and some of their culture, mythology, and geography, and all these things. And this guy, for whatever reason, can read the book. How he learned how to do this is not clearly explained, but he figured it out. So with the base of this book and the guy who could read it, they go to Atlantis and they encounter Atlanteans. And these Atlanteans come out and say something or other to them in Atlantean. And of course, our explorers don't understand that at all. So the Atlanteans tried out different languages. They tried out Spanish and French and Chinese and some other things, and eventually settle on English. fortunately for the viewers of this cartoon. And one of the characters, the hero, the linguist guy is named Milo, who's voiced by Michael J. Fox. And he says to Milo, how did they learn our language so fast? And Milo says, well, that's because their language, and this is the phrase he uses, that's because their language is a root dialect. It's the language that all the languages on earth came from, like the Tower of Babel. And everyone said, oh, okay. And then they go on, and Atlanteans speak English just fine. And they also speak Atlantean to each other, and Milo learns some Atlantean and so on. Anyway, when I saw that line in the script, I said to the producer, the directors, I said, that doesn't make any sense. There's no such thing, forget the difference between language and dialect. There's no such thing as a root dialect or a root language that everything came from. And even if there is, no one could know anything about it. So let's come up with some other reason that the Atlanteans decided to speak English, or how they might have learned English or something or other. And I came up with a few theories. However, they left that line in the script anyway, didn't pay any attention to me. And I said, okay, what are we going to do about that? And I hadn't at this point made up any of the Atlantean language yet. But just sort of think about it. And I said, okay, there's no such thing as a root dialect. Milo thinks it's a root dialect. So what I'm going to do is make up a language such that Milo could come to the theory that it's a root dialect, even if his theory is wrong. Okay? So what I did was made the anti-Klingon. And what I mean by that is I use sounds that are extremely common in languages around the world. I use grammatical structures that are extremely common in languages around the world. For vocabulary, as much as I could, I went back to Proto-Indo-European, to Proto-Sino-Tibetan, to some biblical Hebrew, things like that. And if I could find a word that meant what I needed it to mean and didn't happen to sound like English, a lot of the Indo-European roots did sound like English, which defeated the purpose. But if that wasn't the case, then I would use those and put them into the language. Most of the words I made up because I couldn't find something that fit. But anyway, it was doing it that way. And as a result, to get back to your question, because I used things that are so common and so found all over the place in human languages, it sounded very naturalistic, the language. Made some arbitrary decisions because you have to about what sounds are there, what sounds are not there, what a syllable is, where does the stress go? For the stress, almost every word, not every word, but almost every word is stressed on the first syllable. And the reason for that is because this book that they found that explains everything apparently got into the hands of Vikings. And they lost the book, and it was found in the North Sea or something other. So maybe Atlantis is up there. So, oh, fine. If Atlantis is up in that part of the world, the language is there. Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian all have stress on the first syllable. Cool, we'll do that. That kind of thing.
All right, cool. So
how to make it do it is to use common sounds and syllable types and stuff like that. And also don't sweat it too much. You're gonna if once you make up a set of rules, it works out really well. All of a sudden, you're gonna put a word together with two things put against each other, and you go, "Ooh, that sounds weird." If it's in the early stages of language development, you could do something about it. If it's later stages of language development, that's the way language works. What are you gonna do?